NATO summits are generally pretty dry and wonky affairs, with lots of diplo-speak, most of it signifying nothing. This year was different in some ways. To help us understand what was said and done, and more important, figure out what it all means, I'm joined by two foreign policy favorites, backed by popular demand. Give it up for the incomparable Admiral Mark Montgomery, former Director of Operations at U.S. Pacific Command, Deputy Director for Plans, Policy, and Strategy at U.S. European Command, and Director for Transnational Threats at the National Security Council. He now serves as Senior Director for FDD's Center on Cyber and Technology Innovation. Also with us is the legend, the icon, the star, Brad Bowman, a West Point graduate and former West Point assistant professor who also served for years as an active duty U.S. Army officer, Black Hawk pilot, and a national security advisor in the Senate. He's now Senior Director of FDD's Center on Military and Political Power. I'm Cliff May, and I require no introduction, nor do you. Nevertheless, I'm glad you're with us here on Foreign Policy. Welcome, gentlemen.
Welcome.
You like that introduction?
I like that.
Okay.
I'm taking notes. That's excellent. Next time you let me guest host, I'm going to try to see if I can live up to that statement. Yes.
Okay.
I don't have to hire a hype man now.
Yeah, I got to meet these two people you just introduced. They sound good.
So one way this I want to mention this, not spend a lot of time on this kerfluffle after President Trump dropped a bomb, not on Fordow, an F-bomb, during a White House press gaggle. He criticized both Tehran and Jerusalem for violating his newly announced ceasefire. And then NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte remarked with apparent admiration, "Daddy has to sometimes use strong language," suggesting to get children to stop fighting. I got to say, I'm going to be on. I'm not all that amused in the sense that Iran's rulers, have since 1979, since the Islamic Revolution, threatened death to America and death to Israel. And while their capabilities have now been diminished, we'll talk about that. And that's huge, and President Trump deserves huge credit for that. Tehran's intentions remain genocidal, and I'm not sure that's any joking manner. And to criticize Tehran and Jerusalem in the same breath, one is trying to wipe out the other, and the other is trying to survive. There's no moral equivalence there. I just, for the record, I got to say what I think. I mean,
let me say this about Rutte first. Look, English isn't his first language. I'm pretty sure he doesn't know what "who's your daddy" really means. And so, I, in fairness to him, that it's been Rubio buckling when he said it is, when the question came later, has caused some humor. But your point is well taken, which is that, first of all, ceasefires are hard to implement, right? They don't, the last shot fired isn't at 11 o'clock on the 11th day of the 11th month always, the whole Battle of New Orleans and the fame of Andrew Jackson is predicated on a battle that happened several weeks after the peace treaty was signed, right? So, this, things are not perfect. And to criticize them is wrong. And to equate, Iran, who has a long history of illegitimate and illegal behavior, with Israel, who was carrying out retribution for an illegal act, is inappropriate. But having said that, Trump, the whole thing's blown out of proportion by someone whose first language is Dutch.
Okay.
You commented about moral equivalency. I was going to use that exact phrase. On one hand, I think President Trump, as I think all three of us agree, deserves tremendous credit for finally matching actions with words.
Right.
So many presidents have said, we've all been saying it the last few days, we will not let Iran acquire a nuclear weapon. Yet he's the first one to match kinetic actions with those words. And so I think he deserves incredible credit. And after all, actions are what matter most. But the words of the president matter most as well. He's the most important, most powerful person in the world. And I think it's really unfortunate that he suggested moral equivalency between our best ally in the Middle East and the worst a source of instability in the Middle East, and that's Iran. And I'd say, Cliff, and this is not the first time we've seen this false moral equivalency from Trump. We've seen it on Russia and Ukraine as well, and confusing the invader and the invaded. And I don't really love how the president really was, if I were in his shoes, I might have had some sternly worded calls with Bibi as well, but there's some things you say in private to friends, and there's some things you say in public, and I don't love some of the way he talked about Israel publicly in the last few days. But with all that said, what he did with this attack on Iran's nuclear program seriously degraded, did not destroy their nuclear program, and he deserves great credit for that.
We're going to get back to that, but I want to make to how badly it was degraded. But I want to make one other point here that what strikes me is this is part of his, I won't call it negotiating strategy, I'll call it deal-making strategy. He's sort of saying to Iran, hey, now I can mediate, because they haven't really agreed to negotiate in the past many times, not absolutely always, but many times, certainly during the Obama administration. They said, we will not deign to sit with American infidels in the same damn room. This will have to go through the Russians or the Omanis or somebody else. We don't want to be in the same place with them. We don't talk to them directly. And at this point, they should say, no, you're going to talk to me directly or not. And don't forget, and a couple other things have happened. They are celebrating in Tehran their victory over Israel and America right now. People are being forced out into the street to wave flags. And if they're shouting death to America, President Trump should take note that they're still doing that. Also, the parliament has said we are not going to cooperate with the International Atomic Energy Agency. Now, that's not because the parliament says it doesn't mean the Khamenei, the supreme leader, still has to agree. But if they won't cooperate, and all they're doing is saying, thank you, we're pleased that Israel is no longer hitting our targets. Now, what we have to remember is, again, they have diminished capabilities. We'll talk about that. But their intentions, we haven't seen anything different. President Trump would like to think after this, they've learned their lesson, and they will go back to building the best damn healthcare plan in the Middle East and 401ks. I don't think that's true. This revolution is about something, and this revolution is about jihad, and jihad means America and Israel because they're closer.
Cliff, since 9/11, America, and I'm borrowing from H.R. McMaster here, has struggled to convert battlefield success into sustainable political outcomes that serve the national interest. Here we go again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no,
we go again.
Right, this is a problem. All right. Let's talk a little bit about, there was this, maybe we should say a few words. There was this leaked report by CNN labeled by the Defense Department as a low confidence assessment that not much damage had been done. Shouldn't have been leaked. It's probably somebody who didn't approve of the strike. CNN shouldn't have run with it. Everybody else shouldn't have run with it. We're recording this Thursday morning. I watched Pete Hegseth just, take the media behind the barn and beat the hell out of them this morning. And I'm sort of sympathetic to that because a lot of the media has been just dreadful. Not all the media, but a lot of the media. Anyhow, I think we know something different now. So maybe start with this. Clearly, Ali Khamenei, the supreme leader, for him, this has been a terrible, horrible, no good, very bad week, right?
Yeah. So first, I want to start with it shouldn't have been leaked. Honestly, I don't scream for polygraphs that often, but they need to do a real leak investigation because that was way too, the minimum that was top secret. I'm confident there were a couple letters after that. And that stuff just can't be getting out that fast. That's just ridiculous. That is someone who has absolutely no respect for the military intelligence process. Okay. When I do an attack someplace, I usually get 3 reports. One is an initial, quick look, 24-hour. That's what this was. Then there's one at 96 hours. Then there's one at about 2 to 3 months. I almost never, I wouldn't say 100%, maybe 90% of the time, the confidence of the initial is low confidence. Then you usually get either low or medium on the 96-hour, and you get medium or high on the month-long one. There's a good reason for that, because how you process intel, and there's 4 intels feeding this. There's SIGINT, which is signals intelligence, which the U.S. is world-class at.
Which means picking up recordings of some commander saying, oh my gosh, they really trashed Fordow. I can't believe it. Yeah.
In this region of the world, there's a strong Israeli presence as well. So U.S. and Israeli intel would have really good SIGINT. There's IMINT, which the U.S. is world-class at. That's the imagery. That's the stuff that you're seeing a little bit of because Maxar sells it to the government and sells it to CNN and everybody legally.
Right.
And we can see slightly less refined versions of it.
Right.
Then there's measurement and signals intelligence. That's where like, hey, there's a seismic activity of 2.4. That's the exact amount we expect when 183 feet of concrete crashes through 62 feet of vault space and hits the floor, right? And then there's, which we're very good at. And then there's human intelligence, which the Israelis are very good at in this region of the world. So
we're not so good.
We're not. And so those four loop together, they start to show themselves in the second report. The first report is going to be almost all imagery or immediate human. Like if the Israelis got a call from a guy who said, I ran out of the building just as it collapsed, well, then you'd be like, okay. But probably almost all imagery. So why do I say this? That low confidence report is exactly that, low confidence. And as a customer, I would look at it and go, okay, thanks. I cannot tell you how many times I was told I killed somebody to then find out at the 96-hour somebody may have been there, and then find out the 2-month one, he's fine.
This was during your military career, not here at FTD.
I'm not killing people at FTD that you know of, Cliff.
I'm glad to hear that.
All right. So, but my point on this is it's low confidence. So look, Brad and I, we have a woman here, Lydia Lefebvre, that could absolutely produce the exact same imagery-based report. And she would give us, and she would say, this is very low confidence because I have slightly less. She doesn't even have our imagery isn't quite the government's imagery, right? The problem is, though, because this president and Pete Hegseth don't like to be questioned, it then degenerates into what really should have happened is someone should have reported at CNN, and the response from the Defense Department should be, thanks for letting us know someone's leaking. We're going to go take a look. Instead, they took the bait, and they start screaming over obliterate is not a battle damage assessment word in any case. You're never going to get that from a BDA guy.
I'm going to push back just a little bit because here's what I think, that the leak comes out and CNN goes with it, and what they want to do from a communications point of view is establish the narrative. This is probably what didn't work out so well. Okay, that's what they're trying to do. Why are they trying to do that? Because a week ago on CNN they were saying there's no evidence they have a nuclear weapons program. That's what they were saying. Christine Amanpour, I may have to write this, was making that point with the deputy foreign minister that, maybe they're making you angry. Maybe now you will want to have a nuclear weapon for deterrence sake. And then as soon as the strike is, the nuclear weapons program that they had, it hasn't been set back all that much after all. They didn't have it now. Okay, so there's all that. So what he does is, and because Trump does no communications in a way, in an odd way, and I say that reluctantly because he breaks every rule of communications that I learned years ago. So he says it was obliterated. Now he's trying to establish that as a narrative. Their narrative is no, it wasn't, and then you go through this whole cycle. The Israelis have this all the time because the Gaza Health Ministry says, and it's Hamas, but they don't report it that way. And then they go to the Israelis and say, we don't know what they're talking about. We'll get back to you in 24 hours. It's over.
Here's the difference, though, Cliff. Israel's a small country, so they have to be sensitive to what the BBC and CNN say about them to the American audience. Yeah. We're a big country. We need to act more like a big country. And he's got it. And look, here's the other thing, and Brad knows this like I do. This is a report on Fordow. Yeah. Maybe Fordow only sets it back 3 to 5 months. I doubt it. I think it's years.
Yeah.
The real report we're waiting for is the 96 or 2-month report about the program. Assassinating, 20 plus tier A, tier B scientists. Assassinating 9 of the, not that many, 7 of the top 14 military leaders between the IRGC and the regular Iranian army, destroying the stowage units for the R&D information, destroying the uranium conversion capability at Esfahan twice over, once by the Israelis and then really finishing it by us with the Tomahawks, destroying the centrifuges in Natanz. Let me tell you, those 2 mobs in Natanz, I'm going to go ahead and put my kids 529 down on. That building's flattened. 2 mops into 40 feet of concrete, that's over. The fort, that's why you only needed 2. And I think the 12 mops destroyed the 3,000 centrifuges at Fordow. That's years.
Right.
And that's what I'm saying. We're a big country. Say, look, it's years. Let's wait. But you're right. I mean, that's not how, I know that's not how Trump's wired.
News cycles and news cycles. Okay. So Andrea Stricker at FTD, she worked with David Albright at the Good ISIS for years. Her assessment is the program has been set back at up to 2 years. Which is reasonable. Listen, they can always build back better if they have the money to do so, but then that's an important thing. Do not lift sanctions on them now until you have, do not do so while they're celebrating their victory and promising to build back better. Do not keep their money tight to make it hard. Just as a reminder, the Israelis destroyed the nuclear facility at Osirak in Iraq. Did Saddam Hussein build back better? No, he didn't. But he may believe he did. He may not have had the money. He had the intention to do so. That's something that's not recognized. He did not build back better because he thought it's a bad idea to have nuclear weapons. The Israelis destroyed the North Korean-built nuclear reactor in Syria. They also didn't build back better, but they went to chemical weapons. Which proves our point that there is a long war, and you don't. No permanent victories, only permanent battles, and get used to it because that's reality.
Cliff, you used the word intention there, and that's so important because what is the essence of a threat? A threat is someone who has the intention to do something bad and the means.
Right.
So that gets to the earlier conversation about the sources of the conflict with Iran. Right. I've been saying there are four main sources of the conflict with Iran. It's one, their dedication to the destruction of Israel, their habitual support for terrorism, their large ballistic missile program, and their pursuit of a nuclear weapon capability. Of those four sources of conflict, three of them remain unchanged, and the nuclear one is not gone, but set back. So I'd say we made 0.5 progress on the four sources of conflict with Iran. And that goes right to what we were saying a moment ago. Really impressive military campaign. Setback, Andrea's assessment aligns with what we're seeing and what David Albright and others are saying. Not destroyed, severely degraded. I agree with Mark's assessment on Natanz, Isfahan, Fordow. I'm a little uncertain there. I'm concerned about the near weapons grade enrichment, its status and location.
Right.
I'm concerned about centrifuges that have been manufactured but were never installed. We don't know where those are. I'm also concerned about sites like Pickaxe Mountain that were not hit.
Right.
And so there's concerns.
Right.
But so what do we have on the far left? We have people trying to say this was a failure, nothing accomplished. That is wrong. What is also wrong is that it wasn't obliterated. Unfortunately or fortunately, the truth, as often as the case, is somewhere in the middle.
Hey, one thing I want to mention is that I'm glad you mentioned campaign, Brad, and Brad and I think the same way. This was not here. I'm talking about the Israelis, not the U.S. This was a superb campaign from October 7th to today. Now, look, Israeli intelligence and Israeli military clustered October 7th. There's no other description for an abject failure, both in intel and warning ahead of time and execution of the response on the day of. That doesn't mean they weren't heroes, but it was not run by the military properly. And they know that. And they've held people accountable.
The intelligence was lacking, yeah.
Since then, they have practiced a phenomenal series of successes. I'll set Gaza aside for a second because there's a lot of politics involved in that. I'll just go on the three others and say the campaign against Hezbollah, starting in the spring of 2024, they killed almost every lieutenant colonel and above out in the field, destroyed their ability to strike into Israel, and then executed a coup de grace against the leadership that started with the beepers, went to the walkie-talkies, not exactly the way they wanted to go, but it went pretty well, followed by the execution of the leadership.
Yep.
That was phenomenal. They removed a significant barrier to attacking Iran from the table. The second one they did, almost uncovered, is in the immediate hours after Assad's fleeing, they executed about a 96-hour campaign against the Syrian Air Force and Syrian Air Defense that removed them from the battlefield, which now causes Syria to be Syrian airspace to be an adjunct to Israeli airspace. This is critical to fight this war because another issue Brad and I have been bringing up is the IDF has lots of challenges and they overcome them. One of them that's hard to overcome is a lack of refueling aircraft.
Yeah.
For a lot of reasons, some of which reside with the IDF and politics in Israel, but most of which resides with Boeing Corporation. They're receiving their C-46 replacement refueling aircraft very late. Probably not till 2026, maybe early 2027. That's a big deal. But if you can take your old aging, your 707s And instead of operating them over the goal line, operating them hundreds of miles forward in Syria, now they can do a lot. You don't have to have as high a readiness in each of the aircraft. You can do a lot more. And that was critical to executing, 50 to 100 to 200 strike fighters a day airplan against Iran. So this is a 3-stage plan. And then the Iranian airplane itself, they hit the first things first. Obviously they'd love to hit Fordow. They don't have the weapons, but they hit Natanz, they hit Esfahan, they got at the nuclear sites, they hit at the leadership. I mean, first things first, they hit at the leadership and the scientists, then the sites, then the stowage facilities, then they're hitting ballistic missiles out in the field and working their way down the supply chain for both nuclear components and ballistic missile components. In fact, if I had a beef, this was probably a 15 or 18 or 21 day campaign that was terminated on day 12 by us.
Right.
And I wish we'd kept it up.
Mark, that's a key point, isn't it? I mean, you and I have been saying for years that to destroy Iran's nuclear programs as opposed to severely degrading it was not going to be a one-off from us. It would require multiple days or maybe a week and a half or so. Okay. And so it's not surprising, I would say, that we did this incredibly impressive campaign with our B-2s that we did not destroy, because what haven't we said for years, it would require a lot more than a one-off.
If the U.S. were using 200 strike fighters that we have in theater, very close, much closer than Israel, and the B-2s that come from continental U.S., maybe it's a 4 or 5 day campaign. But when you're using Israeli one, a lower number of aircraft flying a greater distance with one visit from the B-2s, I'm not sure 12 days was enough. Now, look, I think even the IDF was probably tired, but not done.
Right. Yeah.
But my take is that I think they were a little bit surprised by the, okay, I'm out. Mic drop. I hit him with the Fordow was and obliterated. We're done. I think that was unfortunate. And but I think Bibi was in a political position where he couldn't call back up and say, hey, I still had 5 days left.
And I got 150 targets that I still want to hit, including missiles that could hit us later. Yeah. I want to get on to NATO, but a couple of things very quickly. One is, look, I think Trump was thinking of Hiroshima, but even Hiroshima was followed by Nagasaki. And let's understand, after that, the emperor said, we surrender. Again, Khamenei hasn't said we surrender. On the contrary, that's important. One other thing, and this is something
said we won't surrender. Anyone who says we surrender does not understand us, is what he said. Exactly okay, right. To reinforce your point.
Yeah, that is important. I do want to add this, because this is something you guys taught me, which is the difference that people don't often get between the tactical and the strategic. Let's say you're Yahya Sinwar. In a way, from his point of view, what he did on October 7th, 2023 was a great tactical success. It was a great strategic failure, because I can imagine no other way that Israel would be at the point it is now, having severely diminished enemies on 7 fronts, if he hadn't done that. I don't think this would have all happened. And Israel is in a stronger position now. They've bled a lot for that, but they are in a stronger position. That's not what Sinwar, as he watches this, roasting marshmallows in hell, this is not what he wanted to see happen.
Cliff, it's such an important point. I mean, those who don't do this sort of thing full time, I mean, there's just a basic vocabulary to understand. There's the tactical. They think of like a platoon or a company or brigade maneuvering its forces. There's the operational. You start to get up division, corps, and larger. You have the strategic, which is the army level, and then you have the grand strategic, which includes all tools of national power. You can succeed at the tactical, operational, even the strategic level, and absolutely fail at the grand strategic. It's a more wonky way of saying what I said earlier. America struggles often to convert battlefield success to policy political wins that are sustainable, that serve our national interest. And we're now moving to maybe Trump suggesting he's not even sure they wanted a deal, to the negotiating table, where this regime has been particularly effective, and we've been particularly ineffective and prone to adopting bad agreements.
And that's still a danger.
And by the way, what's new here since JCPOA, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Agreement, what's new here is this growing cooperation between Iran, China, and Russia. So I'm watching like a hawk. We're watching like a hawk how China is going to help Iran reconstitute its ballistic missiles, sending them ammonium perchlorate. What is Russia going to send? Are they going to help them rebuild their S-300s? They're a little busy right now with Ukraine, thankfully. But, we got to watch these things. Things have changed. Last time it could make it worse in some ways.
Yeah.
Hey, before you go to NATO, one thing I think that segues into NATO is we saw a side of Trump here that's interesting. why did he jump in on Fordow? Why did he do, as Brad mentioned, something that 25 years of previous American presidents, claimed that they would do if necessary, but didn't, which is bomb Iran. And that's because he likes to associate with winners. I mean, that's part of his personality. And he saw a winner happening.
Absolutely.
And he jumped in on that.
Israel had the
bandwagon.
cards.
That's right. Israel had the cards, and he played it. That's going to be important. If you're Taiwan, the Republic of Korea, Ukraine, the Baltic states, you got to start thinking, how do I describe myself as a winner? And they all have a challenge. Of all the conflicts between an authoritarian state and a democracy, a beleaguered democracy that Brad and I check, there was no mismatch in the Democrats' way, except in the end, if you ask me, I don't care that Israel has 9 million people, and despite the fact that Senator Cruz doesn't know this, Iran has 92 million people. Israel had a strategic advantage, a tactical, operational, and strategic military advantage over Iran. They were a winner. I don't know that the others can create the winner thing, but I did see something in the NATO summit that I think we can kind of start to rally around the winners.
I also sort of suspect this. Tell me if you think I'm wrong. Trump, given his personality, he knows he has B-2s. He knows he has MOPs. You keep them in storage when you could do something like this, and you can do what he wanted to do, is say, I'm going to, and he, give him credit. It's what Schultz said. You don't simply negotiate with the idea that we'll come up with a win-win. You have to have the threat of force there. The Iranian regime did not take that seriously. For 60 days, they thought this guy, he'll never pull the trigger. It's a little Chekhovian. The idea about that Chekhov said, if you show a revolver in the first act, it must be fired by the third act.
Here's the problem. He had those planes and bombs 8 years ago.
Well, he was a younger man.
But here's the difference. No, here's the difference. Israel did not have the F-35. I'm going to tell you right now, first of all, once again, Elon Musk was wrong. The F-35 is not a dinosaur. It is I know buying the F-35 put the Israeli army, not the Air Force, the Israeli army in extremis. But that F-35 allowed Israel to initiate this thing, prove themselves as winners, and pull Donald Trump into this attack. None of us work for Lockheed Martin. We don't get any money from Lockheed Martin. But I'll tell you right now, they delivered a winner with the F-35 because it kicked a lot of ass over the last 2 weeks.
Last question is, if you're going to know our problem, but I just want highly enriched uranium. The Iranian foreign minister, Abbas Aranchi, he said they were taken out of the facilities before they were struck. Do you think that's credible? And if so, how dangerous is that? Can you just give us a few words on that?
I don't know. And I think anyone who's not deep in the intelligence community says that they know is probably wrong. If I were them, I would have advised that they move it from one of the three big, if it was at one of the three big sites, I would have moved it if I were them. If it were at Fordow, Natanz, or Isfahan, I would have moved it to another location that was less likely to get hit. There's some speculation that all those trucks were not just bringing in dirt to pack the entrances to protect them and also prevent any leakage of hazardous materials, but maybe they were actually bringing stuff to Fordow on the belief that it could not be destroyed there.
Right. After all, they built this as a fortress.
That is not my idea. I've heard other people saying that, but that's very interesting. So trucks can bring things and they can take things. They brought some rocks and some sand. Did they also bring some things, or were they taking? Bottom line is, it goes to the core point. What are the open questions, concerns? It's the four I listed. One of them is the near weapons grade uranium, and if you match that with manufactured but not installed centrifuges, you got a problem. It's not a tomorrow problem. It's not a next month problem, but over a many months, it's a problem.
Dirty bombs.
And that's another thing. Everyone talks about timelines. Everyone's like, 8 months, 6 months, 2 years. Anytime someone says that, you got to ask them, what are you talking about? Are you talking about a nuclear device in a container delivered on a ship to Haifa, which they could do a lot sooner? Or are you talking a weapon on top of a ballistic missile, which takes more time? Okay. So people are being real sloppy, and we have to be a little more precise in what we're talking about.
All right, moving on to the NATO summit. Headline on the Wall Street Journal editorial page today: Trump wins the battle of NATO. Do we think so? He certainly dominated, and Rutte got what he wanted. Trump saying nice things, nothing blew up, everything was, was hospitable and all that. There was a commitment to increase defense spending. But Brad, I know you have some reservations on that
No,
score.
you know, I
tweeted on it.
did a little.
People should read your tweet.
Oh, thanks.
Thread
I did a little saucy thing yesterday just to get the juices flowing. But I've dug even deeper since then. You know, I think, as we all do here, we really try to call balls and strikes. And you know, for a long time, people have said, "Oh, we've seen this growth in NATO defense spending. Trump deserves all the credit." And I've kind of pushed back on that, because if you actually look at the numbers, the increased defense spending really started after, you know, Crimea 2014. And I'm not saying Trump didn't have any role, but now I would say Trump deserves an extraordinary amount of credit for this commitment that we now see from the alliance to spend a total of 5%, 3.5% on gross domestic product on defense, and 1.5% on defense-related things relative to defense. I think you got to give him a lot of credit for that. I don't like how he did it. I don't think tying us honoring Article 5, which is that attack against one is attack against all, tying that to defense spending is wise, because it's in our interest to defend Article 5. And if the United States of America suggests we won't honor Article 5, as we've said many times before, it increases the chances of aggression where Americans will be dying. But nonetheless, we're here, and I think Trump deserves credit. So if you look at the declaration that was issued this week, I like that there's a reiteration to Article 5. I like the commitment to spend 5%. I like that they expressed support for Ukraine.
Right.
I like that they said, hey, we got to cut out the defense trade barriers and we got to have more industrial cooperation among allies. And I like that they talked about how Russia represents a long-term threat, quote unquote. But the most significant positive thing, Cliff, I think from this is Trump's different perspective on our European allies and NATO. If you look at his quotes, now I get it. He's mercurial. No. I get it. He's mercurial. It can change tomorrow.
Yep.
But listen to what he said.
Yeah.
I left here differently, he said.
Yes.
NATO, quote, it's not a ripoff, end quote. Do you support Article 5? Quote, of course. Why would I be here if it weren't for my support? Oh my goodness. Thank you very much. Donald Trump, you are right.
Mm-hmm.
You are right. Now keep that viewpoint. Don't change it, because that is true. NATO is a leading national security asset for us, and NATO helps lower our defense burden. It helps us secure ourselves, and it decreases the likelihood of war. It does all those things, and I think he's realizing that now more than ever. Let's pray it sticks.
But it's also more true now than ever, because there was a time for many years when the view of too many NATO nations, still the view of, say, Spain, is, you know what? We're entitled to be protected by you, and we don't need to contribute to the collective security. Why should we? We can be dependent. No, they can't be dependents. They have to be partners.
Exactly.
Israel's given an illustration of what that means. They need to step up and do it too. Some of them absolutely are. My gosh, the Baltic countries absolutely are. But again, Spain, I'm not going there on vacation either now, you know?
30 seconds more than I want to hear from someone who actually was J5 and U.S. European Command and speaks with authority on this. So I just listed a bunch of positive things, a few concerns.
Yeah.
That 5%. By 2035.
2035.
I mean, give me a break.
Yeah.
A lot can happen before 2035, aka like a Crimea-style invasion of the Baltics, for example. So,
will the war with Ukraine still be going on in 2035?
Where's the sense of urgency? And then the 3.5%. Monty and I have been leading on this. Are we going to lead by example or not? We're going to struggle to pay 3% ourselves. So we're going to preach and batter people about not spending, and we're not even going to do it ourselves. And then the 1.5%, I don't know if I'm saying inter alia, all things, including other things. So when they talk about that 1.5, spend it all on, ports, airports, all these amazing things. And then they say, and anything else you like, well, that's a big, huge loophole. So Spain's going to be spending out on football jerseys and try to get credit. I mean, right. And then there's no mention of the 20% of what you're spending on defense. Make sure you spend at least 20% on equipment, not like pensions. And we've seen countries like Greece and others that have had some troubles in those areas, even though they've been doing a lot positive. No mention of China. We're China hawks. We agree on China. Why wouldn't we mention something China? And then lastly, couldn't we have gotten something in the summit declaration related to Iran must never have a nuclear weapon? So I think there's some, and then lastly, this one had 5 sections in it. Last year, 38. So this was streamlined way down with a focus on Trump. His shadow was long at this summit.
So I actually appreciate only 5 paragraphs, because
the
one before was 90. So here's how I look at it. This is a big win for Secretary General Rutte. He played a great game here. His text to, more fawning than any other comments. His text to Trump ahead of time said, This is a big win for you. And he gets it. He described this he got Donald Trump thinking he's a winner, and he is a winner for this. This is a win. Look, I like the 5%. I don't like the 2035. I agree. I'm actually okay with the 3.5 and 1.5 because they weren't going to get to 3.5 is a lot. But as Brad mentioned, we're 3.02. And we're going to go higher this year because of reconciliation to 3.3. But then 2027, we're going to start, I think, with a Pentagon defense budget that's about 2.8 or 2.9. Congress will add to it. Probably get it up to 3 because we would be embarrassed because it's not just here. We've got Bridge Colby over in Asia screaming about 3.5% and other things, 5% for maybe 10% for Taiwan. When we can't break 3, that would be embarrassing. So I think we'll get above 3. But remember, Trump said headed in, we're not going to adhere to this. And then Spain picked it up and said, we're not going to adhere to it. We're 2.1. Now, the problem with Spain was we start with a $900 billion opening bid, right? And they start with maybe this year a $1 trillion opening bid with our budget. So Spain's in more trouble. Rutte did a great job. I want to talk about the 1.5. I did an op-ed on this. This 1.5 is critical. It's about, if we do it right, and as Brad implied, there is a loophole in here. If we do it right, it's about defending your critical infrastructure and the cybersecurity of it and the physical security of it, because this is one of the things we need for them. We need their troops. We need them to buy tanks. We need them to buy planes. We need them to buy ships. By the way, if they all simultaneously went to 5%, the defense industrial bases of the United States and Europe couldn't actually provide the equipment to buy in any reasonable time frame. But on top of that, we want them to be accessible for us in the UK, particularly us bringing in our brigades, divisions, and corps and Air Force fighter squadrons into Europe in a war. We want them to be able to bring over the division probably and squadrons from the UK. And we want the French to be able to move their division rapidly from very Western Europe to the front. To do all that, you need the infrastructure of Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Luxembourg, then Poland and the Baltic states to be very agile, defended, protected against cyber and physical attacks. It's going to take money. And the problem with many of these countries is, when you go to them and they go, what's my number one cybersecurity problem? They might be like, oh, this bank in Rotterdam. No, the port in Rotterdam, right? And maybe we think it's Pier 7 because that's the one you offload tanks at. And they're like, yeah, we don't like that pier. It's Pier 2 and 3 we want, but we're like, no. And the beauty is the last NATO summit set up a NATO critical infrastructure center, which of course in their NATO way is taking 2 to 3 years to set up. But they did put it at SACEUR, the Supreme Allied Commander Europe. So I love this, coming together of the center, the NATO having a real war plan now, which they didn't have 10 years ago, and then this money. If we do it right, we will do the ligature right. And by the way, we at FTD, CCTI, and Brad, we've written a ton on how we need the same thing in our own country, protecting our own military mobility. Well, that 1.5% is about the military mobility of NATO. We're going to come out with a policy paper on this to try to explain it coming out of the summit now over the next month or so. We'll reveal this and try to get, so there's a constant ask from our leaders as we go over to Europe. What are you doing about this? What are you doing about that? So the 1.5% gets spent right. But overall, Rutte, big win. Doesn't hurt that he's 6'5". Trump likes that stuff. But Trump felt he was a winner. Last thing I want to say, he felt he was a winner. And everything you said, all those quotes, Brad, were perfect. I'll give you one more. They set his Zelensky meeting up for the end of the day after win after win after win. And then meets with Zelensky. He comes out and during some press conferences and talking with Zelensky, said, you know what? I will be selling you Patriot missiles.
He did say, I will be.
He said, I think that's reasonable. You got to be careful. He wasn't signing a piece of paper, but I felt these are the kind of quotes that Raytheon can use and look, he didn't say we're giving them to you.
No.
But Zelensky doesn't want it. He wants permission to buy them, and he wants permission for Europeans to buy them for him. There's also a system called AMRAAM, which goes on the NASAM's other air defense system. Because as I've told you a couple of times, my visits to Ukraine tell me, while they aren't going to lose, they're not going to lose. They can not lose ugly. Yeah, and not losing ugly is defined by not having the air defense systems they need to protect their civilians and their critical infrastructure against the illegal, immoral attacks.
Terrorist strikes against civilians day after
by
day.
Putin. Yeah. No, really criminal attack. Not that I support the International Criminal Court, but by any reasonable standard.
Yeah.
A war crime.
I got to respect your time. So last question, take it as quick as you want. The 12-day war, as Trump likes to call it, has it changed the Middle East in profound ways that would not have happened if not for this, and if not for the B-2 and MOP strikes. By the way, I had a column that was totally obviated by what the Trump did because I going away, and I had a great pun in it: B-2 or not to be. I never got to you, but I used it now. So
I like it. You mentioned former Secretary of State George Shultz earlier. His quote that I overused, but it's just so good. If the shadow of I'm paraphrasing, if the shadow of power is not cast over the bargaining or negotiating table, it's just appeasement. President Donald Trump has done something that no president before him has been willing to do with respect to the Iranian nuclear program. He has cast the shadow of power over the negotiating table. Now, how are we going to use it? Are we going to fritter it away or not?
Perfect. Yep, that's
it.
Key question.
Will history look back on this as just another president that oversaw battlefield success and grand strategic failure? This is his moment to go down in the history books in a major way, and it's going to be decided in the next few weeks at the negotiating table or not. That's what I would say on that. And is it fundamentally transformed? No, I would say it's not. Because the fundamental sources of conflict, as I said, are not addressed.
Right. This is an opportunity that still needs
a tremendous opportunity, but this could be a Pyrrhic victory.
Right. And it depends on a lot of decisions being made by the president and by his, I guess,
some of the quotes I'm seeing not encouraging.
Okay. Final word.
I'm going to try to take the optimist. First of all, I attach myself to everything Brad said.
Yeah.
It's very well said. I'm going to take a look externally, like out of the Middle East. And look, over the last 5 years, we have completely disgracefully fumbled a surrender and evacuation from Afghanistan, chaotically abandoning our friends and allies in the field, not informing our NATO partners, disgraceful. We then supported Ukraine in a way that they would probably not lose, but definitely wouldn't win under one president for 3.5 years, from March of 2022 till the election, and then, frankly, on occasion, appeared to abandon them multiple times at the negotiating table under President Trump. Two awful statements to the axis of and all this is happening. The axis of aggressors has gotten bolder and thicker, and more and deeper relationships. Brad and Elaine and myself are putting out a paper on this. Brad's leading on the axis of aggressors.
Center, yeah. Mm-hmm.
That's right. All three of our big centers are. We've got help from Andrea and other, program leads. But it'll focus on how they've worked together. I will say how the United States actually breaking out its big stick that's been sitting, as you mentioned, in stowage for 25, not quite that long, 15 to 18 years, and using it on the battlefield to put one of the axes, that this is the MOP weapon, the massive ordnance penetrator, to signal to one of the axis of aggressors, we've had enough. That's a good signal militarily. But as Brad said, if we fritter away at the negotiating table 2 months later, then that whole signal's lost. But what I'd say here is there's a potential to say the United States will act when it feels its national security interests are at risk. If I was a little bit cynical, I'd say, and the president thinks he'll look like a winner. But, whatever that is, I mean, we just met with the Taiwan leadership today, Craig and I, and we said, one of the things we have to do is figure out how do we talk like winners.
Right.
Because the president likes that. Look, I like it too, but we've got to be, there's an opportunity here is what I would say. So I think Brad's described a risk. I'm describing an opportunity. I think they go hand in glove. If his risk is averted, my opportunity is achieved. So I'm excited to see what happens over the next 3 or 4 weeks.
All right. Thanks for coming in today. A very fascinating, edifying, entertaining conversation for me, and I hope for our listeners. I'm proud to be working in the same organization with you guys on these critical missions. I can't think of anything better I have to do. Thanks for all of you for being with us today here on Foreign Policy.